WEFUNK. We funk.
But that was a great part of the documentary as well, especially growing up. I grew up in the 90s in Ridgewood, so Patterson had already turned by the time that I was growing up in the 90s, you know. And but that is another part of Jersey history that does not, people across the country don't, you know, I have no longer have any name recognition of Patterson or don't know the great history of Patterson. So just covering all of that and getting into it was just a really interesting part. And the whole tour through Hinchcliffe Stadium, which is, you know, one of the last remaining Negro League stadiums and, you know, played a big part in your father's life and all. But that was a great part of the documentary, just in general, taking you through Patterson and showing you, you know, what happened.
Yeah, you know, it's like, even having been born in Patterson, I didn't fully appreciate the history. And you're 100% right. I mean, nobody knows, you know, it was like, you know, as I always say now, it wasn't one of the most important industrial cities in the U.S. It was like the most important. When Hamilton and the others and the founding fathers were looking to where the capital was going to be, they looked at the entire Eastern Seaboard and decided upon Washington, D.C., obviously. And then when they were looking for where the initial industrial center was going to be, they decided Patterson because they were going to harness the power of what were the largest falls south of Niagara. And then as a result, it became, after New York City, the largest center of immigrant labor in the U.S. You know, it was huge. Even to this day, it's the second most densely populated city in the country. And nobody knows the history of you know, how it was.
And like you said, real major industrial things, you know, the Colt 45 or the Colt pistol, the locomotive, like all sorts of major, you know, turning points in our country's history, you know.
Yeah, the apparel industry, the silk industry, the locomotive industry, the first engine plane manufacturing industry was based in Patterson. That's where Curtis Wright had you know, the Wright brothers had their major plant, and it's just it's an amazing story that folks don't know.
Yeah, for sure. And there is a big revitalization effort going on in Patterson. And just announced actually a couple weeks ago was a whole Hinchcliffe Stadium project, which is, you know, like I was mentioning, one of the last Negro League. And what was your father's connection? He mentioned that he had played there. Was he in one of the...
Yeah, you know, he was like a lot of guys. You know, he had wanted to be a pro baseball player, and he was in the, you know, he played on the Army team, and then when he was in the Army, and then he was, you know, he was very briefly with, you know, whatever low divisions of.
Okay, cool. That were playing professionally there, because it was still a very active stadium, but it was its main history was the home of the Black Yankees and the New York Cubans, and it was it still is like a fully standing erect Negro League stadium. I think it's the last in the country, or there might be, it's like the one of two, or you know, the just a dying number of the real direct connections to the lineage of Negro League baseball. And they did just announce a couple weeks ago a $94 million project, hopefully done by the fall of 2022, that encompasses like a senior home, a preschool, as well as a 12,000-foot event space honoring the Negro Leagues, with plans to have, you know, they had the classic East Side Patterson Catholic High School game there every year, as well as, you know, the local track and field high school events and, you know, concerts. Duke Ellington had his last concert there in 1971. They're going to have more concerts there. So a whole revitalization effort underway, really, you know, linchpinned around Hinchcliffe Stadium. And the falls are still the, you know, biggest, no new waterfalls have emerged on the eastern seaboard.
So. Well, you know, when we're done with the festival run, and if we're fortunate to have the film land on one of the platforms, whether it be Netflix or Amazon, I'm going to do just a really quick re-edit, because you're right. I think that, you know, we talk in the film about some of the revitalization efforts, but if they're small, like the money being spent on the falls. But I'd like to include that stadium piece.
You want to know what was kind of sad even about the talk of the revitalization effort is, and a big shout out to the gentleman from the Patterson Museum or whatever the guy that you interviewed was, but his kind of attitude towards revitalizing it, in my opinion, was a very much like, hey man, we're gonna try our best, but it's like, it's Patterson, nothing's gonna work, you know. He was like, he did not seem very optimistic. He's like, we're going to try like the people before us, but that's all we can do, man, is give it our best shot.
I'm glad I'm psyched you keyed on that moment, because that, to me, that was such a sincere moment from him, because, you know, he was, this guy, he helps run the Patterson Museum, which is a great place to visit for folks who haven't been there. But, he's kind of the newer generation of immigration, came from Egypt. And when, we asked him about, these efforts, and he was, he couldn't have been more passionate and caring, but he was also super realistic, and to your point, he was like, all we can do is try our best. And it was, to me, it was a really poignant moment that I wanted to include in the
Absolutely.
film.
And I think, like you said, sincere. It was very sincere. Like, I'm not bashing him at all by saying that. It was a really sincere, sweet moment where you can tell this is a true passion that he cares about. But I mean, if you've driven through Patterson, even just the drone shots on the documentary really capture. It's a grim state of affairs, and that's really the only Patterson that I've ever known or grew up in. So you'd love to think of, and honestly, with just the everything before coronavirus anyway. Everything around New York City was sprawling, and you could see a light at the end of tunnel. They've tried with Newark, and they're gonna keep trying with Newark and but so hopefully by the fall of 22, some more Negro League heritage and the history of Patterson will start turning around.
Big F! WEFUNK. We funk.